June 25th, 1996. We're just circling the Indian Islands around the Eskasoni Indian Band on the East Bay of the Brador Lakes. We've been flying at about 400 feet in about 80 knots, 70, 80 knots. And we're just going to go by the outer Indian Islands. They almost look like drumlinoid structures with small spits running off the backside of several of them. They extend out into the harbors. And in fact, there's a shallow area off a lot of those spits. At the more seaward end of the islands, you can see there's an erosional cliff, partially stabilized in places, but it's around 5 to 10 meters. And then on the end, you get those small spits. There's quite a shallow area off this island, and you can see it just in the foreground of the video. The time is 09:44, June 25th. There's a very nice spit extending into the bay, a couple ridges, beach ridges that are covered by trees. As we move away from Eskasoni, we've gotten into more bedrock outcrops along the base of the cliffs and fringing pebble cobble beach with scattered boulders in places. New development. It seems to be fairly common along here, new housing and so on. Just going by a small bare schwa that had an opening to it, and then a second bare schwa that doesn't have an opening. And then there's a river coming in just here, river outlet. It's mostly pebble, sand pebble, fine pebble. Then we're going to go into a series of bare schwas in a minute. They're probably fed by some of these cliffs that we're just going along now. I think this is mostly four-shoe group. We'll be getting into in a few minutes, and tuffs and basalt, so we'll see if we pick up a difference. Right now we still have beaches of sand and pebble mostly. There's one of the bare schwas, doesn't appear to have an opening. Some of the wildlife ducks along it. Very low lying and progradational on the northeast side. In between the two bare schwas, there's cliffs again. Some of them are partially stabilized with trees, and others are a free face, and they're about 15 meters, I would guess, to 20 meters in height. There's some rotational slumping on that cliff. And then we get into a rock-controlled part of the bare schwa right at the proximal end. And as we head towards the distal end, there's several residences along the way. And it appears to be maybe rock-controlled, although they have put out several shore protection obstacles. The spit itself is very narrow. It's dune grass. There's a road running along the backside of it until you get to the distal end where you've got a tubular or drumstick shape. This is called Cosset Point, and the time is 09:47. Heading farther up East Bay and the Brador Lakes, June 25th. You can see we're getting into sort of a strip development. There used to be an old wharf. You can just maybe pick it up in the water by the church. And a lot more strip development, housing and so on. Now we're starting to get into Windsor group again, or Horton group. There's some gypsum exposed there, and more rock outcrops. Several of these small headlands have been reworked for man-made developments, and others are somewhat more natural. Very shallow waters just offshore appear to be sand, and then we go into a deeper area again. We'll cut across East Bay north side. There's a gravel pit supposedly in the back shore, and there seems to be some gravel mining down at the beach as well. Just the gravel pile just coming into view now in the back of that small inlet. Many of the residences along here have shore protection added to protect their property values, I guess. It varies from rock riprap to wooden crib work.
There's a variety of artificial structures along this shore, but where there are no residences, you get generally an unconsolidated erosional scarp or cliff in the back shore, a discontinuous fringing beach fronting it, and then a fairly wide shoal. Much higher free face erosional cliff just as we get to the outlet of Spring Brook, and you see there's artificial structures controlling its the outlet to the brook, and some bedrock exposures up on this shore.
Heading up towards Mackenzie East Bay. We'll be following a fairly extensive bear schwa at first, and then we go into a cliff wall. And then we'll go into what looks to be groins all along a barrier, controlling the head of East Bay. Flying at 400 feet, and it's 0950.
As we approach the long barrier at the head of East Bay, you can see that there's some erosional cliffs, but the wide fringing beach protects them from getting sediment. Some riprap protecting the road back there, and then there's a series of groins sticking offshore. The first few seem to be collecting sediment, and each one, as you go along, is collecting less and less sediment. As you get to this wide area, which probably was a former distal end of a spit or something, there's a boat launching area, and then the groins after that have very little, if any, sediment collected. Although you might see sediment collected along the side of the road there. There seems to be a shoal area, and maybe because of the highway.
Just gone by this very large bear schwa, which has several openings through it into the head of East Bay. As you get into this area, you can see an immediate difference in the shoreline. It's more wetland and protected. It's fairly shallow water. And then as we get up to the road that cuts across it, there's only a very small opening into the headland, the headwaters of East Bay. There's quite a bit of stratified drift all along the south side of the bay, and looks like there's a fair bit on this north side as well. We're just circling the head of East Bay now. As you can see, it's very shallow, wet land, and probably brackish to low marsh vegetation. There is a connection to the sea farther down, and to get a view looking back. Time is 0952. We're flying at 600 feet and about 70 knots. It's June 25th, 1996. As we come out of the head of East Bay, we'll be coming up to the road, the first road, and there's a very small opening under it connecting the head. You can see a bit of a main channel on the bridge side of the road that heads into the head, and then that meanders through the next section of East Bay towards the other bridge. the barrier there. What I'd like to do is go over here to the barrier again now. And then get a look back at that again. We're just going to get a better view of this groin-controlled structure at the head of East Bay. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, about 13, 12 or 13 groins, and there's one sort of a progradational feature in the middle, a bit of a parking or a boat ramp area. There you can see how they've got them built. They're fairly closely spaced, probably a couple hundred meters apart. The try and trap material. On the other, the south side of East Bay, we're picking up more bear schwas and small spits. This is where we're getting into the stratified drift deposits. There's much more material for beach development. Time is 09:55. We'll be following Highway 4 pretty well along this part of East Bay. There's residential properties all along this section of East Bay. The back shore is some rock outcrop, partially stabilized cliff, under 10 meters elevation. The beach itself is sand and pebble, and the near shore is very, well, it looks like vegetated, maybe cobble and sand. Some scattered boulders all along the shore as well. There's some nice marina, private marina, where he's controlled it, but brought in rock to control it. The shoreline. Several of these properties have wharves extending out offshore, wooden ones, and wooden crib work along the side of their property.
As we approach the Benyon ski resort, we're following Highway 4. Most of the shoreline along here is almost continuous artificial seawalls, riprap, or whatever. A lot of residences. It's 09:57 right now.
The shoreline is intermittent residential wood crib work and mixed sediment beaches, anywhere from sand to boulder. Several number of rock outcrops and boulder deposits as well. Several people have boats anchored just offshore. It's fairly shallow. It appears to be mostly sand with scattered boulders. There's cuspate features along the shore where they're anchored by either rock outcrop or boulder deposits. The beach you're looking at right now is mostly a coarse pebble and cobble. The back shore in places is well vegetated and stabilized, and other places you get intermittent free face. And again, it's probably about 10 meters, I would guess. Here's artificially built mooring area or a pool for the kids at that house.
The beach continues along here, but it's sort of intermittent in terms of width. There's some rock outcrop, a lot more boulder in the near shore. The back shore is vegetated, scarp to vegetated, fairly stable area. The The terrain farther inland increases to 150 meters, and there's several cottages along here with several wharves, natural groins of boulder accumulations, and there may be some bedrock outcrop just along this slope, but it's primarily a narrow, fringy beach.
Part of the shore, because of the back shore is increasing to around 60 meters. The foreshore has actually got a lot more bedrock outcrop, more cobble boulder in the near shore, and there's actually intermittent ramping.
The rock shore switches into a more fringing beach and then into the McDougall Point barrier, or the Benyon campground as it's called, where they used to mine aggregate.
Circling around, we're going to be looking on a fairly large trailer court in a second. It's built on a barrier, fairly extensive one that extends offshore. There's the same white deposits just offshore, maybe bedrock holding this in place, maybe the Windsor Group or whatever. The trailer park itself has put in boulders like groins to try and trap material. It doesn't look like it's all that successful, but there is some cusping of the beach just where the boulders are. Seems to be old beach ridge in behind where the trailers are, and then you get into a very narrow proximal end of this spit, which is mostly fine pebble and sand material, and then in the near shore it's cobble and boulder. Connected to this Berchois is a cliff, mostly unconsolidated, but I would bet that there's probably some bedrock just near the base, fairly unstable. Time is 1000 hours. This section between now and the next Berchois is intermittent fringing beach, much more mixed sediment, sand, pebble, cobble, boulder, and then a bank at the back or cliff at the back that's partially stabilized. By these residences, you can see they've got some shore protection, wooden crib work. The bank at the back is probably less than 3 meters. Then we're coming into this large Berchois. There's a fellow down there for scale at the entrance, fairly shallow entranceway to it. It's cobble boulder in the near shore. The beach itself is mostly pebble, some dune grass, some sand obviously, and it's very narrow. It looks like it gets overwashed fairly regularly, but not to the extreme that it forms channels. There's no really good channel development.
The beach gets somewhat narrower in the next section before we get to Porphyry Point. There's several seawalls, erosional scarps on the back shore, and riprap. And then we'll switch into more bedrock outcrops.
Just coming into view on the screen. Irregular topography on the rock. Maybe this is some of the foreshore group with the basalts and the tuffs starting to show up. And the beach itself is pebble cobble with a partially stabilized cliff in the back with rills and gully.
We're just approaching the outlet of Briac or Breck Brook, a large extensive floodplain with some beach development in front of it, some wetland, and possibly some old beach ridges where the trees are. We switch back into a high erosional cliff, and then there's a large groin, which used to be the big pond wharf, and a beach that's built in behind it from west to east. And then there's some riprap at the base of the highway, as there are in several of these cottages and seawalls as well. Shallow water, and just coming into view is the distal end, or maybe it's the proximal end of an old barrier that used to extend all along shore, protecting this inner shore from waves. It's just in the foreground of our video now. But the whole barrier is now submerged, and all you see is the lag shoal from it. It's just coming into view again now, and there may well have been a flood tidal deposit at this end, but you can see the remnant barrier in the foreground.
very shallow area in here. There's no beach going across the front of this. Well, I mean, there's a beach in the back, but I would have expected almost a barrier to extend across some of that shallow water area. The barrachois along here are mostly fine pebble and cobble material. So a lot of shore protection going on along this section. Then we're going to be going out around where I believe is to be Lockmore Harbor. See quite an extensive beach ridge complex at the end, and then it switches back into a very narrow overwashed barrier, recurves, several small recurve ridges coming along here. It looks like it gets overwashed fairly frequently along this section. Sand deposits offshore with cobble and some boulder, but mostly cobble and sand. And the beach, as we get towards the proximal end, is almost all pebble. Some more beach ridges at the proximal end. It's 10:05. The time. To the south of Lockmore Harbor, we're back into the cliffs. Elevation of about probably close to 30 meters. Some slides have come down it. And then we're getting into a low-lying area, and we'll be going into another large barrachois called Lockenfad or Long Pond. It's also called McPherson's Pond. There's an intermittent barrier across the front of it. You can see that most of the barrier is submerged and broken apart. It's mostly pebble material. There's cobble boulders just offshore. And behind on the inner shore is residents. Many of those have shore protection in front. As we get towards the proximal end of the spit, it gets closer to the other main shore. It's mostly all pebble material, less sand, and it's cobble boulder in the near shore. Coming off of it, we get into residences that have some groin structures and crib work built in front of them. A big new house being built there with a terrace and so on.
Fringing beach mostly along here, but there's a small rock outcrop with an artificial groin in the corner here.
Some stratified deposits or drift deposits in this area as well. Time is 10:07. The relief along here, we're up to around 60 meters in the back shore, and a lot more exposed bedrock all along here. There's more lobster traps along the shoreline. You can just make them out in the foreground. And the beach is intermittent and it's fairly narrow. A fair bit of wildlife around the fishing boat, or waterfowl around the fishing boat, the lobster fishermen at work. And supposedly mostly the Horseshoe group, tufts and and basalts. It looks like a fairly resistant rock. It's exposed just down near the water level. It's very irregular. It doesn't have that texture we've seen elsewhere in the lake. Coming into a low area called Irish Vale. Very, very pretty spot. Has a small barrier in front of the Berchois. The headland itself was rock controlled, and the barrier is overwashed. It's for the most part it's cobble material, and very little exposed above high tide, as you might call it, or regular water level. Time is 10:09. We're flying at around 350 feet at 70 knots, and we're just getting on to along Highway 4 here. The beach here is primarily pebble material. Some people have walkways that go down to the beach. It's pebble, cobble, some partially stabilized cliff at the back. It's 10-10. You can see bedrock exposures intermittent. Again, it's more resistant rock, and you can see that the beach material is much different than we've also seen elsewhere. Increasing the elevation now closer to probably 20 meters. We've got bedrock outcrop. It's a bit of a ramp, but I don't think I'd quite call it a ramp yet, coming off the beach and into the backshore.
At the outlet of Irish Brook, there used to be limestone quarrying, but there also seems to be aggregate mining.
There's poorly stabilized cliffs. This is probably the stratified deposit that's just in here over top of the bedrock. The beach again is 10 to 20 meter wide in places, and mostly pebble, cobble, and then there's a nearshore area which again is more coarse material.